Hi, I'm Chris Graham, and I'm the curator of exhibitions here at the American Civil War Museum. And I'm currently in the Southern Ambitions exhibit, and it is an exhibit that explores the way the Confederate States imagined their place in the global order after what they thought would be their independence. And I'm here in the corner that touches on 1864 to talk about the presidential election in the United States of 1864. So why am I in an exhibit about the Confederacy to talk about the U.S. presidential election? Because although Confederates couldn't vote in that election, of course, they felt they had a great stake in its outcome. And in fact, the outcome of that election became one of its strategic goals, and they attempted to not a great extent, influence the course of that election. Now, first thing I want to do is start with this image back here. And this is the Republican Party going to the White House. And it's a Democratic Party image, and it features Lincoln and his supporters. And those include Mormons and free love advocates and communists and politically active black people and drunk Irish people and the lawless and dregs of society. And this is a pretty accurate picture of the way white Southerners imagined Abraham Lincoln as president, as the leader of a dangerous radical party. And despite the fact that they succeed to get away from that, secure their position in a slave-based ordered society, they still want to maintain some kind of beneficial relationship with what's left of the United States. They just don't want to do it with Lincoln involved. And so as they are attempting to secure their independence, they always have an idea about a future in which they are economic and political partners with what remains of the United States. To secure their independence, this is the second thing that's important here, is to secure their independence. The Confederate States realized kind of early on that they cannot defeat the United States on the battlefield. They can't win their independence through a battlefield victory. And so a strategic objective becomes a war of attrition. Make it so painful for the United States to continue this war that they eventually give up. And so with Robert E. Lee as the lead, if not yet commanding general of all Confederate armies, they began a strategy of being on the offensive all the time. And so you get campaigns that culminate in Sharpsburg, that culminate in Gettysburg. But by 1864, the year of the election, the Confederate military can no longer mount a credible offensive to harass the United States Army. It can only be on the defensive, which doesn't help with their strategy of wearing down the United States. And so they look more intently to the presidential election of 1864 to achieve their strategic goals. And that's because the Democratic Party in the United States had mixed messaging about what it wanted to do with the rest of the war. Some Democrats wanted to immediately sue for peace, enter into negotiations with the Confederate States. The Democratic nominee, former General George McClellan, indicated that he did want to continue the war, but with this mixed messaging, of course, the Confederates imagined that the Democratic victory in the presidential election was their best chance to secure a negotiated peace. And so Confederate policymakers, politicians, editorialists, and newspapers began promoting various scenarios in which peace could be negotiated. So they come up with a couple of different things. First, they suggest that the United States could they would extend preferential trade agreements to the United States upon peace. And so the United States, as opposed to England or France, could have the access to southern cotton and southern raw goods that it excelled through slave labor in producing. And so they figured that northern business interests would be extremely interested in pursuing that and promote the Democratic Party in the election. They also looked to kind of the home base of the Republican Party and abolitionism in general in New England. And they reached out to the upper Midwest states. They said, dear Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, you don't want to be a part of a nation of these crazy New Englanders, of these abolitionists, of these free love advocates, these women's rights advocates. Those people are crazy. If you separate from them, you will have a friend in us, and again, beneficial economic relationships. The Midwest had long supplied most of the foodstuffs to feed southern slave plantations before the Civil War, so they figured they could pick up on that again. So how did the Confederate States attempt to influence this election? They didn't really have a, they weren't doing counterintelligence operations up north. They were publishing their opinions in their own newspapers, which, as newspapers go through lines, they hope to influence northern thinkers and politicians and northern editors in saying this is what the Confederate States is looking for out of this election. They do send informal envoys to the United States through Canada, through Niagara Falls. That effort never really, they have some meetings, but it never really amounts to anything. And they also receive informal United States envoys in the summer of 1864 in Richmond to talk with them about their hopes for about their plans for the election and hoping to sway it. None of these really work. With Lincoln reelected as president, they know that this is going to be a war to the death, to the utter destruction of the Confederacy. And ironically, that steels more Confederates to fight harder, to hang on longer, because even though they know the war is going to continue, even though they're in bad shape right now, they imagine a future under the Republican Party to be worse than the present under the assault of war. But many Confederates still imagine that there's room for a negotiated peace. And so that leads to one of the biggest meetings between President Lincoln and Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens at Hampton Roads aboard the River Queen steamship. And Stephens kind of expresses what is the Confederate negotiating position after Lincoln has been reelected. And Stephens is no longer offering preferential trade agreements, no longer offering to assist with the breakup of the old United States. His terms of negotiation have considerably shrunk. He says, maybe we'll consider returning to the United States on one condition and one condition alone, that we preserve slavery, that we keep it. This is, of course, at this point, not a condition that the United States or Lincoln would ever think about accepting. And so the Confederate States next month went down in utter and complete defeat. So elections mattered to them, even elections they couldn't vote in. So the Confederates were right. The re-election of Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party did spell the doom and utter destruction of the Confederate States of America. But here's one of the ironic points, is that the former Confederate States, once returned to the United States during and after Reconstruction, could then begin to participate in and have direct influence on presidential elections from there on out. Former Confederates, white Southerners particularly, conservative white Southerners, as voters, as politicians, and as policymakers, could, through direct participation in American elections, shape United States' domestic and foreign policy for generations to come.